The following is a special video presentation of the Hennepin County Library.
Hi, welcome to a discussion with Kathy Russell. I'm Roberta Kemp, Hennepin County Library, and my guest is Kathy Russell, author of The Color Complex, The Politics of Skin Color Among African Americans. Kathy, you're a script writer and a poet. Tell me a little bit about that.
Okay. Well, actually, I graduated from a small school in Illinois called Lewis University, and I got my graduate degree in computer science and with an emphasis on business administration. And then right out of school, I can call myself one of the lucky ones. I went right into working for IBM now, so I kind of got a job right out, in my major. And but what I've always wanted to really do is write. I've always really been interested in writing. So I started to kind of do it on the side. And I had some poetry that I entered contests and won some awards. And then I started working on a screenplay, actually. And then the idea for the book really came, and I kind of got very passionate about writing that. And I've had to since put the screenplay aside, start to work on this. And now maybe I can go back to that after I finish publicizing the book.
Well, tell me more about what led up to doing the book.
Okay. Well, I think there were several factors, and many of which I probably am only aware of now after writing the book. I think the main reason I wrote it was because I realized in the African American community there was a lot of pain surrounding issues of skin color, hair, and features, and I wasn't really sure where all that came from. And trying to get more information about that, I found there was nothing written about it. There was not a book written. There were books with chapters on interracial skin color discrimination, but nothing real comprehensive that kind of started from the origins and went all the way through. So in talking to friends, I realized there was a lot of pain. There were some things that happened earlier on as a child that I can look back and remember with myself and my cousin, which we kind of grew up together, and she was a darker skinned black girl with short hair, and myself much lighter than she, and at that time I had hair down my back, and I remember going out places and people would always run up to me and tell me, "Oh, you're so beautiful, and look at your hair, it's so pretty," and never saying anything to her. And that was real painful for me because I really loved her, and I realized there was something more going on there. But I think the thing that really made me decide to write this book was during high school. And if you could think about this, during high school, this had to be a devastating situation. I was dating, not high school, I'm sorry, college. I was dating a gentleman. He's a dark-skinned black gentleman. And during a date, he told me, "Well, I think we're going to have to break it off." Well, okay, I can deal with that. And the reason was because I wasn't light enough to bear his children. And I thought, first of all, how dare he think, who said, first of all, I was even going to go that far with him, but just him saying that told me that there was something more here.
What did you do when that happened?
Well, when that happened, I, of course, walked out. And after I stewed about it for a while, I said, okay, now I've got to figure out where this is coming from. So I go to the library and I talk to some of my older relatives, and all the older relatives were like, "Shh, don't talk about that. We don't want white people to know about that, and we don't want that out, and don't talk about that, and that doesn't exist." And I'm like, "It does exist. I know it does. I see it every day. It's obvious that it exists." And not being able to find anything about it, I decided to go on this one-woman crusade of sorts to kind of find out what this whole skin color issue was about.
Talk a little bit about your relatives, but you dedicate this book to your mother. What did she teach you, either directly or indirectly, about color and color bias?
Well, she was real instrumental in my life in teaching me how important it was to be happy about who you are, no matter how you look. And I think that's why it was painful for me to see the treatment of my cousin, because I did love her, and regardless of the fact that she had short hair or whatever it was, that shouldn't be a basis on which to love or not love somebody. And she was also so important because between kindergarten to 8th grade, I basically grew up in an all-white environment. I think out of 500 kids, there were only 3 blacks, and I was one of them. So I had to really learn early on how to be proud of myself, because in a situation like that, especially because a lot of the white kids I went to school with had never even seen a black person before.
Was this in Illinois?
It was in Illinois. Not that they hadn't seen one, they hadn't interacted. So then you get all the weird stereotypes that have been taught to them, whether through their parents or through just the society.
I understand.
So
I live in Minnesota.
Right.
Okay.
So I had to really rise to the occasion, and that's why it's funny, because I was telling someone earlier that I became tops in my class. I won all the spelling bees. I won all the math. I just was like the most outgoing person, and I think it was a way of me proving. And my mother was instrumental in letting me know that I was capable of doing those things, and no matter how many times they called me chocolate cake, which was at 3rd grade the most devastating thing. It's like chocolate cake, But later on, they of course begin to love me and me them. So it's kind of a testament to if you just leave people alone and let them get together, they'll be okay.
That's interesting. What about the other authors, Midge Wilson and Ronald Hall? Could you tell us a little bit about them?
Sure. Dr. Midge Wilson is a feminist women's psychology professor at DePaul University, and she's a white woman, and she studied beauty among white women and how it affects them. And then as like an offshoot, she started to study beauty among African American women and found that it was very different. And through one of her, she directed one of her students' doctoral thesis on the issue of skin color. And that particular woman, her name is Angela Neal at Kent State, she told me about Midge. Because I didn't want to write it by myself. Writing is a very lonely job, so I decided I'd like to have a co-author. And in looking at many African American journalists and writers, most of them were too tied up to deal with it. But she told me about Midge, and Midge and I got a good friendship going, and we worked together well. And then Ronald Hall came about because Midge and Ron were both expert witnesses at a case. It was one of the first cases ever in Atlanta where a light-skinned black woman sued her darker-skinned black supervisor over skin color discrimination. They met there. So then all 3 of us decided to bring to a book the different views of a black man, a white woman, and a black woman.
How do you do it? I mean, like, he lives here in Minneapolis teaching Oxford College. And
right. Well, he's at University of St. Thomas now. He's since moved since I came out. Well, Midge and I had a very good working relationship. We just kind of figured it out. I'd write, she'd edit, I'd edit what she writes, I'd write, because majority of writing is editing. So we'd go back and forth that way. And Ron, we would take after what we had written, we'd send it to him, he'd reread it, make comments, send back. So he really acted more like a consultant on the project, which we really need. And then we needed that kind of burst of the black male point of view, because you had 2 women and one a feminist, so the book, we didn't want to slant it that way totally.
So you kind of blended it?
Yeah, we kind of blended it with all those 3 views we thought was very important.
You said that black is not just a color, it's an experience.
Yes.
Could you kind of explain that?
Well, what I mean by that is there's always a controversy about, like during the 60s, lighter-skinned blacks were often spurned for not being black enough because they were considered, we call it the blacker-than-thou experience in the book. It's, well, you don't have dark skin and you don't have, kinky hair, so therefore, you've had it better all your life. You don't know anything about being black. And that's unfortunate, because some of the blackest people I know, quote-unquote blackest people I know, are very light-skinned, and some of them even could pass for white. So it really doesn't have anything to do with color skin you are. It's your experience. For instance, if you're a light-skinned black male, like say you have a white father and a black mother, but if you're going to be treated you're still going to be treated in the society like a black man. And if you've grown up with black values and you have the lingo and you have all the other stuff that goes with the black culture, and you consider yourself black, then that's what you are. That's how you identify. So that's why I wish we would stop trying to put a color on it. I think it's also hard to put a color on it because African Americans range in everything from jet black to albino. So it's kind of hard in everything in between. So it's kind of hard to put a color on someone's blackness.
So what about people who have multiracial heritage? Are you saying then that they shouldn't necessarily be called a color? What should they be called?
Well, I think it's really up to the person. I don't think that we should decide for them who they are. I think it's important that they decide for themselves who they are. I do, like multicultural activists say, the whole 1 drop rule, 1 ounce of black, making you black. They don't buy into that. First of all, I think they realize, and what a lot of blacks don't realize is that it's a very racist rule by nature. It was basically created so that white slave masters could maintain their slave wealth by sleeping with as many black slaves, women that they could, and enslaving all of the children. And I think a lot of people don't realize where it comes from. So they still stand by it. But multicultural activists say that if you have a white mother and a black father, that you should be able to be all that you are. That's a healthy way of looking at it. They shouldn't have to live by a rule that's very racist in nature that determines someone's blackness. It's almost as if to say black blood has tainted white blood, so therefore, you have to be black. So if they choose to be, if their mother is Italian, Irish, and English, and their father is African, Indian, and whatever else, then they should be able to be all that they are. No one should tell them how to identify.
That's great. Let's go back 200 years.
Okay.
To around Thomas Jefferson. Let's talk about Thomas Jefferson. Who was Sally Hemings, and what was the controversy surrounding the two people?
Okay. Well, Sally Hemings was a slave of Thomas Jefferson, and it's a belief by many historians that many of the mulatto children that she bred were Thomas's, and we do give Mr. Jefferson, I guess I should say Thomas. They were his children, and I think many historians have tried to cover that fact up because he was first of all, the fact that he had slaves, a man that,
father of our country.
A father of our country, that he even had slaves. And many people have asked me about that. Well, what do you think about Thomas Jefferson having slaves? Well, first of all, I think that Thomas Jefferson is a man of his time. Therefore, I don't know that he really knew any different, Maybe he did because of what he wrote, but I think because he was a man of his time, and this is not to excuse him having slaves, but I think that's a reason why that he does, and maybe that's one reason that it doesn't bother me as much. But I think we need to explore, because there's evidence on both sides that maybe those children were by actually an uncle or a cousin, and maybe they were actually Thomas Jefferson's children. So I think that we need to explore that a little bit.
But it was just interesting because Sally Hemings was actually half-sister of his wife.
Right, exactly.
And his wife died, and he really loved his wife, and then when she walked in, she was, what, about 20 years?
No, well, when she first I think went to Paris where she was like 15. So, and then she started having her first kids. I think that's probably more of a problem also, the fact that a grown man would take advantage of a 15-year-old young woman. But they say she looked a lot like his wife because she was actually the half-sister of her.
Okay.
But there was a lot of that going on. So a lot of our leaders probably have these black children running around somewhere.
DAR kids.
Kids, right?
What about colorism? Could you give us a definition of what that is?
Well, colorism is, the definition is interracial skin color discrimination within a group of people. Not unique to African Americans, though. I think the issue's been hidden a lot in the African American community. There's been some shame about it because they don't want others to know that there's a discrimination within their own race. When it's kind of like doing the same thing within your own race that's been done to you. But I think it's important to note that colorism is everywhere that Europeans kind of crossed and roamed the globe and conquered. As they did, they left behind a legacy of colorism. I mean, you can see it in places that whites never even went, you know.
Like what?
Well, India, you see it in the Middle East. Old proverbs talk a lot about the beauty of white, pale skin. Japanese women powdered their faces white. In Brazil, there's a whole color caste system based on skin color. In South and Central America, we even went back and found where back in Egypt, where they would do paintings, they would paint the women in lighter shades than the men, because we found out since that not only is white or light skin more beautiful, but it's also considered more feminine. So there's all these different ways of kind of seeing how light or white skin has been favored almost in every culture that there is.
Oh, okay, so that's how a well-known rhyme in the black community came about. That's when you're white, you're right.
Right.
When you're yellow, you're mellow.
Right.
If you're brown, stay around. If you black, step back.
Step back, exactly.
Okay. Well, let's talk about power and privilege. Are there differences in earnings between light-skinned African Americans and dark-skinned African Americans?
Well, Hughes and Hertel, which they are two professors from a school in Virginia, actually did research, and I think this was in 1990, that showed that light-skinned blacks made $1 to every 70 cents dark-skinned blacks made, which is the same ratio black to white. So there's definitely something going on there.
Okay, what about the relationship between color and crime, color and sentencing, color and getting a job?
Right. Well, I think that, well, for instance, there's a kind of rhyme in the black community that goes, lighter the skin, lighter the sentence. And talking to a lot of people in the prison sentence, for this book we interviewed numerous people, and talking to a lot of people in the prison system, they'll tell you there's an overwhelming number of darker skinned black men in the prison system. And I think because dark-skinned blacks, there's some kind of perception that darker-skinned blacks are more criminally dangerous. Dark-skinned black men are more criminally dangerous.
Do you think that's what happened to Rodney King?
Well, it's a possibility. You know, I think there's a lot of factors. And colorism, for instance, it kind of overlaps. It overlaps into racism, into sexism. There's a lot of isms that kind of all interplay, you know, to kind of create this type of prejudice amongst black people.
Well, what about dating and mating?
Yeah, well, that's interesting too. Dating and mating, that's, in the book we deal with interracial relationships, and we deal with, there seems to be a tendency among African American men, dark-skinned African American men, to marry lighter-skinned black women. And there's been a lot of theories as to why this happens. One is that some people say that because there's a belief among African Americans that light skin is more feminine and more beautiful, that's why they choose them. Another is choosing light-skinned black women because it's closer to a white woman. It's the whole light but not quite syndrome. And so it's in the African American community, there's been a lot of black women especially have pained a lot over the fact that especially successful black men tend to either marry light-skinned black women or black women. And some people believe they do it because they're trying to lighten the line so that they can have lighter-skinned children, which unfortunately our research showed is something that's kind of prized, lighter-skinned black children.
But why would a black woman marry a white man?
A black woman marry a white man? Well, a lot of black women say, and our research say, that they marry white men because of the ratio. You know, the ratio is very high. Eligible black, marriageable black men to black women. A lot of our black men are in jail, uneducated, without jobs, married to white women, unavailable in some way. So therefore they say that the next available option is to marry a white man. And then for some people, they just love the person. I think that oftentimes we try and make too much of why someone's doing something. I think there's a such thing as, we're compatible. I really love you. You love me. We're going to do this. So I think, it can really be that simple, too.
Well, you were also talking about, as far as, simple things, like everything that a black man or woman does as far as appearance is interpreted as politically.
Right, exactly. A lot of white people have said to me, well, why does it matter? Why does it matter what color your skin is, how long your hair is, this, that, and the other? But I think what it is living in a society that's a white dominant society where the standard of beauty is something way to the opposite of what African Americans possess. White skin, light eyes, light blonde hair, that it does become political, because anytime instead of it's like when a white woman perms her hair and makes it curly, no one accuses her of trying to be black. But if a black woman straightens her hair, she's accused of trying to be white. Or, if a white woman gets a tan, hardly is she trying to be black. But if a black woman uses Ambi to kind of even out her skin tone, it's why are you bleaching your skin? So everything becomes political, instead of it being totally cosmetic and meaning nothing. For me, skin color, hair, all that stuff is totally cosmetic. It has nothing to do with the soul. It has nothing to do with what's on the inside. It has nothing to do with how black or proud I am. It has nothing to do with any of that. I think a lot of times we put too much emphasis on that, but it's understandable in a society that has kind of taken black culture away. People need something to hold on to. You don't have a homeland, really. I mean, we can say we're African Americans, but how many of us can say, I came from Zimbabwe, I came from Ghana? Many of us can't say that. So you need something to hold on to, so your black heritage becomes that. So that's why it becomes so political and important.
What about Michael Jackson? You talk about blacks in media.
Well, Michael is a very extreme case of what's going on, but I always, in defense of Michael and then really not in defense of him, I always say that he did not create black self-hatred, that he's a product of his environment. Michael just happens to have the money and means to take it as far as he wants to do. And I often wonder how many other of us would take it that far. I hope not many, but I mean, that's a question that I have. What is really bad about what Michael has done, and in this book, not at all do I try to play like some police people for what they do. If you want to marry interracially, you should do that. If you want to straighten your hair, you should do that. But what becomes a problem, especially for someone as famous as Michael Jackson, influential, is that he has a lot of money, a lot of power, a lot of influence, and people look up to him. And when I talk to children and they tell me that the reason why they choose a white doll, or the reason why they choose light-skinned friends, or the reason why they want to be white is because look at what Michael's done and he's successful. I mean, that's very painful. So the message that he's giving is what's most painful about what Michael has done. And we talk about in the book, a friend of his, which helped him produce his album, actually produced his album, the Black and White album, said that if Michael had to do it all over again, he probably wouldn't do that.
Okay, well, you talk about kids saying they want to be like Michael Jackson. What can black parents do to ensure that their children's self-esteem is high about color, and also what can they tell their kids how to respond to color bias?
Well, I think that we often teach our children about racism, but very seldom do we teach them about colorism. And I think colorism probably hurts even more than racism, because racism you kind of come to expect. Unfortunately, it shouldn't be that way, but because of the society that we live in. Colorism is a little harder because it's the people that are supposed to love you for who you are discriminate against you the same way someone from the outside does. I think the most important thing that parents can do for children, for black children, is first of all instill with them a sense of self-esteem and pride about their race. Hopefully when they open up books they can see themselves. I think we need to start teaching in school a lot more black history. It's important for children to open up their book and see themselves so that they know that they are beautiful, that they are worthy. I think that parents need to have discussions about these issues. I think in this book it was important that we had the origins so that people will know where it comes from, understand that it's a product of racism, and just how we need to fight that. White racism against black people, as well as black racism against white people. I can't call that racism, but blacks against whites. We need to deal with that on both sides.
Well, you talk about education and what people could do as parents. What about what implications for the employer or for the counselor or therapist?
Well, what happens is a lot of these issues of colorism have really been tough for African Americans to deal with, and because there hasn't been any dialogue over colorism because of the controversy over the issue, there hasn't been a dialogue. So hopefully, this book will be a point of reference. A lot of white therapists haven't been able to kind of key in to the fact that this could be part of this person's self-esteem issue, to look back into their family to find out, in a family of many varying colors of children, did their parents want lighter skinned children, and he was the darkest one, and he was didn't feel as loved. So that's why it has implication for social workers and parents and employers as well. I think some white employers actually told us that they would choose a lighter skinned black over a darker skin because they thought that they came from a nicer family. And, a lot of things that are very stereotypical, and a lot of issues that we need to really clean up. And hopefully with this book, that'll be a way of bringing those issues out and into the open, and more discussion and more talk about it.
Do you think there are going to be more cases going to court regarding color harassment?
Oh, I think so now. Since that happened with Tracy Morrill, I think that was in 1989, there has been several cases now. I think the court system, at that time when Tracy Morrill came out, a lot of white attorneys were like, well, I never even heard of this. She couldn't get anyone to take her case. But it specifically says that race, color, creed, national, all those are different. Color is different than race. You can be black, but in the black race have many different colors, so there can be bias, not only race to race, but color to color.
What's going to happen next for you?
Well, I'm actually going to start working on another project called Across the Lines, and it's dealing with, the basic premise is, this is race relations, I guess this was my calling, so, and it's basically dealing with the fact that that you cannot be a racist if you understand someone's culture. So I think that in writing this book and in writing a lot of other things, I think that that's kind of what I've learned. If you really understand me, not what the media says and not what some friend or your parents have told you, but if you really get to know me, you can know that all blacks aren't on welfare, and if I get to know you, I know that all white people aren't racist.
Well, Kathy, it's just been a tremendous time with
you.
Thank you for being with us.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, Roberta.
Thank you for watching a discussion with Kathy Russell.
A presentation of the Hennepin County Library.